Who is the stranger that you have only seen meet once in your life that you still think about time to time? When I was fresh out of college, I drove over 2 hours away for a job interview and got into a car accident like a block away from the building. My car was completely totaled. A woman who was stopped at the stop sign near my accident pulled over and got out to make sure I was okay. I was completely fine physically but have very bad anxiety and immediately had a panic attack. I was sobbing and couldn't catch my breath, and this complete stranger sat with me the entire time telling me to breathe and just being so caring and supportive. She waited with me for the police to come. She helped me talk them through what happened. She called my mom for me. She even called the office I was on my way to so she could let them know about the accident and that I would call them to reschedule my interview. As if that wasn't enough, once she found out that I was that far away from home and it was going to take my mom 2 hours to get to me, she cancelled her meeting that she was already late to so she could drive me halfway. She did not think it was a big deal whatsoever. She just stepped up to the plate to help without question. I would have been completely alone and lost without her that day. She was an angel. Honestly, I lost her business card between all the paperwork from the accident and I've been kicking myself over it for the last 5 years. All I want is to call her and tell her how thankful I am and that I've kept her in my thoughts ever since. Roxanne, if you're out there, thank you so much. And please, for the love of God, send me your last name so I can send you some flowers. Honor her by paying it forward. At some point in your life you're going to see a person in need. In that moment, you have the power to be there, Roxanne. When I was a kid, I flew by myself for the first time. At the airport, when I was about to check in, I spotted an elderly lady looking at me deeply. At first I thought I accidentally hit her or something, so I asked if she needed anything. She nodded, didn't give it much importance, so I just checked in and headed to my plane. Later, already on the plane, I see the very same lady, looking for her seat. Of course I helped her and asked her what number her seat was. She handed me her ticket, B37. I'll never forget it because I was the C37. She sat right next to me. I was scared. I was a kid, and I wasn't used to coincidences. Anyway, long flight. When we arrived and were waiting for the plane to land for us to head out, she finally says, you really look like my daughter. I even thought you were her, but she passed away 5 years ago. Silly me. Here, this is her with my grandkids. She handed me her phone with a zoomed in picture. I was paralyzed when I saw her. She looked exactly like me, but she was 28 and I was 10. I couldn't even talk. Now that I am older, every time I look in the mirror for my birthday, I remember that lady in the picture. I am a living photo of her daughter. Every year that goes by is a year that I look more like that woman in the picture. When I turn 28, I hope this memory will finally scare me less. I met my husband's doppelganger once. The man looked exactly like my husband. I was with someone at the hospital waiting for their medical transport to pick us up and I saw who I thought was my husband across the street. My husband was supposed to be at work, so I was confused. I called out to him but he didn't respond. My patient and I walked over to him, but I stopped short a few feet away because I started to realize maybe it wasn't actually him. His clothes were different and this man was assisting someone in caregiving type role. My husband absolutely would not do that. The guy noticed me staring at him and so I explained why and even showed him a picture of my husband. He swore that was a picture of him and this was all some practical joke. I had to show him pictures of my husband and I together for him to realize the pictures were not of him. This man could have been his identical twin. I often think of that encounter and how insane it was. I also think of the astronomical chances that not only did my husband have a doppelganger but that we lived in the same city for a while and I happened to cross paths with him. I was once approached by a woman in a supermarket who told me, "Oh, so you're the one that people say looks like my son." I was kinda confused and weirded out, but she explained that numerous of her friends had told her about this guy around town that looks exactly like your son. I live in a relatively small city, less than 10,000 people. She didn't show me a picture or anything, but I still live in the city and still keep my eye out for my fabled doppelganger, so that one day we may fight to the death. An old man I overheard telling his grandkids that if their dad got accepted to the job he was interviewing for in town, they would move there and then they could visit each other all the time. I never even saw the guy interviewing for the job, but I really hope he got it. I once saw my exact double in a Barnes Noble. We saw each other from a far distance, locked eyes, gave a slow head nod to each other, and kept going without saying a word. Sometimes I wonder how he is doing. I never met my double, but he hates me. I was on a train one night and a girl came up to me like, "Hey Brian, how have you been?" And I was like, "What? I'm not Brian." Then she mentioned this dude's last name like, "Ah, Brian, you're always a dick," and laughed it off and left. I Facebooked this guy and it was my exact double. I friend requested him like, "Yo, isn't this funny?" And he was just a dick. When I was young, maybe 5, my mom got really sick and was screaming in pain as she drove me and herself to the hospital. No one else was with us. When we got there, she passed out in the car. I ran up to the hospital and got a wheelchair. She managed to somehow flop herself into the chair and passed out again. The hospital was uphill, and I was too weak to push her. She was too heavy. A stranger came out of nowhere, wheeled her in and made enough ruckus to get her immediate attention. She spent the next 2 months in the hospital. I never saw that guy again, but I think about him all the time and I'd like to thank him one day. Once I was walking to work past a homeless shelter pickup spot. It was a sunny day, middle of summer. A small lady was standing on the sidewalk wearing rain boots, a yellow raincoat, and wrapped completely in a blue vinyl tarp. As I walked by her, she leaned into me, looked me in the eye and said, "Fish monster." I still think about her. Did she think I was a fish monster? Was she concerned that I had seen a fish monster? Perhaps she felt I was unprepared, and her questioning tone was more about if I'd heard about the potential of fish monsters. Such a surreally complex interaction in just 2 words. One thing I know for certain is that whatever the fish monster status was, she was clearly the best prepared of everyone present. I was doing last-minute Father's Day shopping with my son for my husband. There was a young lady in the card section crying full on. Broken-hearted, ugly crying. I looked at her and thought, poor thing, I hope she's okay. We finished our shopping, line up to check out, and she was still there. She's pick up a card, look at it, burst into fresh tears, put it back, then compose herself and lose it all over again. By now my heart was breaking for her, so I sent my son off to grab a box of chocolates. We bought our stuff and waited just outside for her. When she came out, I grabbed the chocks, approached her and said, "I don't know what's going on, it's none of my business, but I got these for you. I promise things will get better." She burst into tears, grabbed me in a hug and said, "My dad died 2 days ago." Anyway, longish story short, we sat down and she told me about her dad and how she wanted to put a Father's Day card in his coffin with the present she'd gotten him and all the things people need to say when someone they love dies suddenly. We went our separate ways when she saw how late it was, and honestly, to this day I don't know if I'd recognize her even if I bumped into her again. But I've always wondered how she made it through her first Father's Day without her dad and how she's doing now. I haven't told anyone but my husband this story before, and I'm only sharing it now on the random chance she reads it, remembers us, and I can find out how she's doing. When I was in Iraq in 2003, we were partnered with some local police. Their compound was a secure area, and no unauthorized people were allowed in. There was this little girl, probably about 7-9 years old, that's old bananas, and was allowed in or out whenever she wanted. I hope she's doing well. When I was 10, I went to a supermarket in my taekwondo uniform. A black man asked me to teach him how to properly kick in the middle of the store in front of everyone. Never seen him since. When I was 7 years old or so, I remember riding home from school and waving the peace sign out of the window of my parents' car to all the passing cars. I spread peace to one girl, who instantly gave me the middle finger. I was so hurt. All I wanted to do was spread peace. I still think about that bee to this day. Legend has it her name was Karen. When I was a kid, we didn't have a lot of money, so we often shopped at thrift stores. What I loved about that was that you could get 10 books for $1. So I would plant myself in front of the book section and make piles of which one I wanted to get, and then decided after I'd gone through them all. One day an older lady saw me sitting with my piles and asked if I liked to read. I told her I did and showed her a few of the books I found that I liked. She smiled and then pulled $1 out of her purse, handed it to me and said, "Promise me that you'll keep reading." I was so happy and immediately stood up and said that I would. She smiled and walked away, and I went back to my piles, able to pick out an extra 10 books to take home. It was just a small act of kindness for her, but for me, having a random stranger encourage my love of reading and making me promise to never stop definitely had a lot to do with my continued love of reading. This was over 20 years ago, but I still think of her whenever I buy a new book. Not a complete stranger but a classmate in my first year at uni. We shared some classes but didn't really spoke to each other beside the casual greetings. One morning she got a call on her cell phone. Came back to the classroom visibly upset to gather her things and left. I never saw her again after that. Still think randomly about it sometimes. 14 years later. I was on my way back from Disneyland Paris, sat in the airport and a guy beside me was typing away on his laptop. A little curious at what he was writing, I peeked over and saw the title, The Last Letter I'll Ever Write. I was frozen for a few minutes. I'm 24 and I had absolutely no idea what to do. I thought maybe he was a writer and if I ask he'll look stupid. Eventually though I turned round to him and said, "Look man, I really hope I'm making a fool of myself, but are you okay?" Turns out he and his long-term partner had broken up, and they were meant to be coming on this holiday that he'd now come on with his dad. He blamed himself, and he'd been going to therapy for a while to get out of a pretty dark place, but some days were better than others. And writing the letters was an exercise from his therapist. We chatted for a bit about her, his dad, me, life in general. Turned out his brother lived nearby me and frequented a coffee shop right by where I used to live. Eventually my plane got called, and we hugged and I told him I really hope things get better for him and that at the very least I'd had a lovely time talking to him. We left there and I still wonder what happened to him. I hope he's happy now. I hope that he's managed to find some good in the world again, but I guess I'll never know for sure. Until my most recent car, I've always driven old junkers that somehow managed to get me to and from work, and bless them for it, but for this memory my metallic orange 1996 Chevy Corsica was bottoming out the brakes when I was stopped too long at lights, and would shut down entirely. I drifted off to the side, called my parents and job to let them know what was going on, and just had to wait for help to show. There was no shoulder for me to pull into, and cars were whizzing past fast enough to shake my car, which I was sweating to death inside of because of course none of my cars had AC. I watched the cars go by, see about 2 cop cars come and go without so much as a pause, which is weird given where I was stuck and with my hazards going too, but whatever, it's Jersey, I'm not expecting much. Besides a ticket, an undercover car pulls up behind me and a sweet middle-aged guy asks what's up. I let him know I'm just waiting on help to push the car to the other side of the road, at least since there's a shoulder there. He has me hop out and make sure that there really isn't any way to move it without some extra muscle, and lets me come hang in his car so I can at least catch some air. I leave the door cracked just to be safe, but he's nice about it all. He has the lights inside going and the radio is crackling things I barely understand, but seemed legit enough. Turns out he's not police, but disaster relief, and tells me all about how he helped out when Sandy hit and also how he noticed the cops drive on past without even checking in, and how he'll be reporting them for it. Super chill dude. I had to ask why, if he's just disaster relief, did he stop by, and he just mentioned that he would hope someone would do the same for his daughter. Eventually my help shows up and it's all settled and I thanked him about 100+ times. But I still think about him and it warms my heart to remember that people do things just to be nice sometimes, too. When I was a kid I went with my family on vacation to Veracruz in Mexico. We decided to eat some empanadas in the street, and while we were eating, a Chinese tourist arrived and asked us with signs. They were speaking Chinese all the time if they could take a photo. My parents said yes and each one of them took a photo with our family while we were eating empanadas. They said goodbye in Chinese and continue their journey. I was at the mall as a teenager and a 90-something-year-old Indian woman made deep eye contact and nodded. I got a deep chill and a sense of familiarity, but I was like 14 so I went back to my friends. The pregnant lady who was absolutely bawling in the lobby of a hotel I was visiting for the afternoon. My mom was at a conference and I was going to meet her. I awkwardly approached the lady, asking her what was wrong. She told me that nothing was wrong. It was just that she had decided to serve as the pregnancy surrogate for her sister. She had just had the realization that the decision to be her sister's surrogate really had been the right one for her. She was happy, crying because it was all just too perfect for her in that moment.